No, don't do it yourself. No, don't do it. Hello my loves, and thank you for joining me. It's Kirsten, and today we are doing some horror and gothic book recommendations. In the past, I would say 8 months or so, I have been delving into the horror genre, and I have found some ones that I've really enjoyed. So we do have a bit of a mixture. I'm starting off with the more adult horror, transitioning to young adult horror, and then going into some gothic books. I really like all of these books. I think they're perfect for this sort of time as well. Of course, October and just the fall autumn season in general is quite a good time for reading some of those darker books. And you know what makes it even better is right now it is pouring with rain outside, so I feel like the ambience is just perfect for filming this kind of video. So with that out the way, let's just dive straight into these books, and do let me know, what is your favorite horror book? I'd be very curious to know. Side note, actually, there are no classic books in this selection. If you would like to see some gothic classic recommendations, I will have that video linked below. It is from a few years ago, so you'll have to excuse some of the filming in that one, but if you are interested in a more up-to-date version of our gothic classics, please let me know and I will look into doing that. But otherwise, you've got all those gothic classic recommendations in that video. Now that we're actually done with all the housekeeping, let's just dive straight into some book recommendations. And of course, I wanted to start off with an author first, and that author is Kingfisher. I really love Kingfisher's work. They are an incredibly consistent author, and they do have a range. Now, they have some of their more gothic leaning works as well as some more romance leaning works, and I have read from both and adored both types. But of course, we are talking about the more gothic horror leaning works that Kingfisher has done, and I'm holding up two of my favourite. I could have shown off all of them. I love Kingfisher's work. I think they are an incredible author. I would say Kingfisher is probably one of my favourite authors just because of sheer consistency of their work. But let's get into these two books. So first of all, we have A House with Good Bones, and this one is a kind of haunted house creepy book, which I really enjoyed, but also with Kingfisher's signature humour woven through. I also really like the fact that Kingfisher normally follows older main characters, which I really appreciate. And in this one, we're following a character who is being called back to her family home because her mum, well, she doesn't seem quite right, and when she gets there, things are more worrying indeed. It is a really good creepy book. I really enjoyed just the aspects of how the tension was built and the horror elements were placed. Now, I am not a fan of bugs, and there is a scene in here that, oof, the bugs. It was so gross, but it was really well done. I really enjoyed it, and of course we have that humorous tone to it. And I also love how most of Kingfisher's characters are very much unapologetically themselves, and again, I really appreciate that. So I would really recommend Kingfisher, but if you are after more of a haunted house one, then A House with Good Bones is really good for it. And then if you want something that's a little bit more fairy tale leaning, we've got Nettle and Bone, and this one we're following a main character whose sister has been married off to this really awful prince. It deals with a lot of difficult issues around abuse, and we have this sister that is like, I've had enough. Nobody is saving my sister. I'm going to save my sister. And she recruits the help of a few other people to do this. And we do have things that are kind of from folklore fairy tale vibes. We have a kind of goblin market-esque in this, which I really enjoyed. We've also got kind of that tale of you have to try and do these 3 things to get to where you need to be. There's just lots of different folklore elements to this book, which I really appreciated, and it is on that slightly darker side. Nettle and Bone was the first Kingfisher book that I read, and it does remain my favourite if I'm honest, but I mean, so many of their books are just so good. But again, we still have that more humorous tone throughout this. We have a slight relationship that's blossoming, but it's definitely not the center focus of this book. And I just loved what we did with it. I loved the themes that were spoken about and how they were handled in here. It was really well done. And again, following a slightly older main character who has been sent to live in this nunnery so that she can be saved if anything happens to her sister, and they need this political connection with this ruthless, horrible person. And yeah, it's just awful. Everything about it is awful, but I love how our main character is so much determined to just put things to right and get rid of him. Fantastic. Great book, great sisterly bond as well, which I really appreciate. And also a demon-possessed chicken. So if nothing else I said gets you, at least read it for the demon-possessed chicken, because that was great. Okay, moving on to a book that I do want to reread, Into the Drowning Deep by Mira Grant. I really enjoyed this, and this sparked off a sub-genre, sub-focus within horror that I am kind of obsessed with, and that is Oceanic horror. This is definitely more scientific leaning, but I really appreciated that actually. So in this book, we are following a main character who, her sister had perished. Now, her sister was originally part of this kind of spoof documentary where they were going to prove that mermaids existed, and they were going to, I think it's the Mariana Trench? Yes, the Mariana Trench, to go and film this mockumentary about these mermaids, except something happened on that ship. Everybody died, and her sister has been determined to find out what actually happens, and now they are actually sponsoring another ship to go, and she gets invited to join, and she cannot wait to find out what actually happened to her sister. She is actually a scientist. She focuses in on the sounds within the ocean, which I really appreciated, but we see things take quite a dark turn when maybe mermaids are real and maybe they're very murderous. I loved this. This was so good. I read it on Kindle, and then I definitely wanted a physical copy so that I could reread it, annotate it. I really enjoyed this. Before this book, I wasn't sure if horror was for me. I had certain authors that I was happy to read from, like Kingfisher, but I wasn't fully certain if the horror genre was going to be something that I was fully invested in. But this book changed my mind on that, because I realized how much I really enjoyed this book, how interesting it was, the way that it built up that sense of dread, the tension, the things that were happening. Like, it was great. I really enjoyed it. You do get kind of past timelines as well in this, and you do get multiple different perspectives of different people that are part of this crew. It's really good. I really enjoyed this one, and I have always been asking after recommendations for, if people have liked this, what other things have you read? One that was similar is From Below by Darcy Coates. No killer mermaids in that one, but we have a similar setup where we have the oceanic horror. In this one, we are following a crew that is going down again to see another shipwreck to try and find out what happened. This particular ship emerged miles and miles off course, and again, everybody died, and they're trying to work out what actually happened, and things are very sinister indeed. So I do think you should give this book a try if you did like Into the Drowning Deep. I had to take a bit of time between the two books because there are elements of it that are very similar, as well as that whole past and present narratives. Just certain things were very similar, although this one is a lot more scientific. I do think this one is the better one, but I did really enjoy From Below, and I do want to read more Darcy Coates books in general, because I did think it was a good fun time. But that's one I read on Kindle and not one I own physically. Didn't expect to talk about it during this, but now you have 19 recommendations. It was a good book. So okay, continuing on with the oceanic horror, we have The Salt Grows Heavy by Cassandra Core. Now, I have read Cassandra Core's other book, didn't really enjoy it, and that's Nothing But Blackened Teeth, but this one, fantastic. And it's a tiny little horror novella, and again, this is about mermaids. So we're following our mermaid. She's our main character, and she is tied to this person who is making her go through on land. And it's kind of like a Little Mermaid, very loose retelling, but very gothic and dark. And we stumble upon this village that is very disturbing, especially in the way that they're treating the children there. I don't want to give too much away because it's such a tiny little book, but I really enjoyed the writing style. It is very purple prose and a bit full of itself at times, but I just think the actual horror elements of this were very good. The atmosphere was built really well, and I just enjoyed it. It was a very good book. It's just a shame that the other book I was not a fan of. I didn't think it was as good, but this is fantastic. I mean, it's just an awesome book. So if you are after a little oceanic horror book, I would recommend. A few others, we've got Mexican Gothic by Silvia Moreno Garcia. This kind of takes that haunted house, but make it a bit more reminiscent of things like Rebecca, Jane Eyre, but put a bit more of a growing fungus grossness twist to it. It was a good book. I enjoyed this one. I think Silvia Moreno Garcia, again, very varied author, and I do like what they do. I have one more book by them which I need to read, which is Silver Nitrate. I would really like to read that one. But this one I did enjoy, probably because of my love of those Gothic classics. And this one I would say does straddle the line between just Gothic and horror. Like there's little elements of horror, especially around the fungus. Some of that is absolutely disgusting and disturbing, but it does also lean into just that Gothic element. So in this one, our main character Naomi, she loves the glamorous life and everything, but she gets a frantic letter from her cousin who is newlywed, and so she is tasked with going out to find out what the hell is going on. And when she gets there, her cousin's like, no, I never sent you anything. That wasn't me. I didn't do anything. And things do not quite add up. It's very sinister, very eerie in this house, and I did enjoy it. There were some things that I thought were a little bit convenient, but overall I thought this was a very solid, darker, Gothic horror book. Honestly, I should have put that one further down the list to go into those Gothic books. Back to straight horror, we have Near the Bone by Christina Henry. Now I do like Christina Henry's older works. I really like the fairy tale retellings that they've done, which again all lean slightly more horror leaning, but this one is my favourite book by them. I really loved the horror feel of this, and it tackles a very disturbing topic. So we have this main character who has lived in this cabin, cut off from society with this very abusive man for as long as she can remember. I mean, her life, her day-to-day life is awful. One day there's this group of hikers and one of them stumbles across her, and then weird, terrible things start happening in those woods, and it is so disturbing. It felt like a horror movie to me, and I feel like the ending of this is the ending of a horror movie. Now that's something I will say about Christina Henry, is sometimes the way they finish things just kind of leaves it hanging, which can be frustrating, but I actually think it worked really well for this one. We have the disturbing storyline of our main character and how she got to be in this cabin, as well as the murderous beast out in those woods that is doing these awful things. I really liked it. I thought it was a good book that blended a few different elements together. Like definitely the strongest Christina Henry book, I would say. And this is a perfect read for winter because it is in the snowy mountainside type thing. A recent read that I've really like is more of a literary horror, and that's Chlorine by Jade Song. I annotated this one to death. I really enjoyed this book. This is a look at Ren. Ren is a swimmer. She's been obsessed with the swimming pool ever since she was young. She's also very obsessed with mermaids, and in this book we see her growing up. She goes through puberty. We see her interactions with her coach and how very gross those interactions are, and how they really straddle the line between what shouldn't ever be acceptable. Some of the things that he said, like, it's very, very gross how toxic it is, and about trying to become an athlete and the things it does to your body. And also this does go into some quite gory details of puberty, but at the same time I kind of liked that. I kind of liked how it made us question how we are taught in schools that girls going through puberty and getting periods and stuff, and it's all like sterilized and all of this, like the way it's taught, and in reality it's an absolute mess. Like, it is horrible and gross and sometimes can be quite traumatic for some people. So I really like the way it discussed that as well. And then the horror bits. Good lord. There was a scene where all I could do was just keep looking away and go, no, don't do it to yourself. No, don't do it. Because it was just so, oh god, so gross. It was so gruesome. It genuinely made me very uncomfortable, but I really enjoyed it. I thought it was such a good book, so interesting. And again, the narrative's kind of split up where we do have these letters as well, which I like, but I also feel like maybe we didn't necessarily need, but it was a very good book. I really enjoyed this. It does have a lot of talk at the start about mermaid folklore. I wish that was focused on more in this book, but overall this was a very good literary horror book that I do recommend. I have mentioned it recently in some of my weird book recommendations because it is weird as well, but yeah, it's definitely one that I would say is very uncomfortable to read because of the things that it tackles. It's good, but it's disturbing. Talking about disturbing, we have Juniper and Thorn by Ava Reid. Now, I have read 3 of Ava Reid's books, but I would say this is the one that is probably the most horrifying, the most dark, but I really liked it for that. This is actually a retelling of The Juniper Tree by the Brothers Grimm. The Juniper Tree is one of the darkest folklore tales. As a result, this book is very dark, and it also again depicts things like being a woman, sexuality in ways that some people may find very uncomfortable, but I actually thought it was very well done. This is another book that I have annotated, and I really enjoyed what this book was doing. This is definitely my favourite book by Ava Reid. I think the atmosphere was really good in this. We're following our main character, Mary Lynchen. She's got two other sisters. They are witches. She has always felt a bit of an outsider. Their father is this really horrible person. He has made her endure these really horrible situations for his own benefit, which she, understandably, the direction that things go in because of the trauma of what she's had to go through is, yeah, it's a lot. But I really liked it. It is very dark, and there are some bits that some people are like, oh, this is a bit too unnecessary in the book, but actually I thought it worked really well as a retelling of the Juniper Tree and the things that it was exploring. And yes, it's visceral and pushes things to the extreme in some cases, but I thought it worked really well. I really enjoyed it, seeing the development of this story and this kind of darker presence that's overhanging everything. Definitely a book I would like to reread. I think out of the three that I've read by Ava Reid, obviously this is my favourite and the one that I would most likely reread. I would say the next book after this would be A Study in Drowning, but this is more gothic leaning with some folklore elements to it. But I would say the darkest is Juniper and Thorn. If you want something that's just slightly gothic, atmosphere in its depictions of where they are and everything, then I would go for A Study in Drowning. But both very good books. I do just prefer Juniper and Thorn. Also, if you can hear lots of bells, it is just the nearby church. It's a Sunday morning, is what happens, but I actually quite like them. Okay, now we're moving into gothic adult story. We have a book that I read this year that has become a favourite of mine, and that is You Let Me In by Camilla Bruce. Loved this book so much. The reason why I've put it in more of the gothic one is because while it is a horror book, it also is in tone a very gothic dark book. It is a book where you have two tales being told. We have our main character, and you've got to decide for yourself. Do you believe what she's saying about it being to do with the fairy folk, or do we believe what the psychologist is saying and it being the fact that she was very severely neglected and mistreated by her parents, and she created this fantasy world because that's the only way her brain could handle it? Loved it. I love the fact that this book gives weight to both sides of those stories, so it really is down to you and the way you want to interpret it. Or, like our main character says, why can't both be true? But the way this is written is our main character has passed away, and in her will she has said to her, I think it's her niece and nephew, if you want to own my effects, you must read my version of events of what actually happened, and within this tale will be a password that you give to the solicitor, and then you will inherit everything. And so it's these two young people that are reading, well, it's these two relations that are reading what happened to an aunt that has always been seen as, well, not reliable in this family, that always lies, that always makes up tales and stuff, and now they're getting actually happened? Question mark? Really enjoyed it. It is such a short but impactful book. It was phenomenal writing and something that will always stay with me. I really enjoyed this one. I want to reread it and annotate it. I just thought it was fantastic. Highly, highly recommend this book. Check your trigger warnings. It is not an easy read. It is a very disturbing read, as I've said a lot in this, but yeah. We then have Last Tale of the Flower Bride by Russian Chocney. This is a book that I do want to get a physical copy of, and this one definitely leads into the more gothic elements, but also ties in that fairy tale folklore vibe to it. We're following a character who has married this woman on the basis that he will never ever ask questions about her past. But of course things start happening and the past unravels. Again, you get this story of, is this real? Is it real? Are these folklore, fairy tale, fairy folk elements of it actually real? And I really like that. I love the way this was done. It's not a book for everyone. It's very purple prosy. It's very slow. It's definitely just the gothic atmospheric story, but I loved it, and I loved the twist at the end. I really, really love this book. This is one I'd like to own physically and reread and annotate. I read it pretty much in the same time of reading You Let Me In, and both of them are going to be on my top books of the year because I really, really enjoyed them. Then we have another book that I love, one of my favourite books ever, and that is Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. Again, I've put this in more of the gothic time because while there are some more horrific elements to this book. I would say the writing overall lends itself to a more gothic quality, but this is what should be considered a vampire classic. We have our vampire Louis, who's given his interview to this reporter about becoming a vampire, and it is his story, and it is so well done and so richly decadent, and I love the writing style of this. I love the different themes that were explored. I thought it was a fantastic book. As you can tell by the amount of blooming annotations I did, I thought it was stunning. So again, a book I would love to reread, because there's definitely an element of this book that I want to annotate that I didn't because of circumstances at the time, but I loved this book so much. It is a book I do consider one of my favourite books of all time. That and Jonathan Strange and Mr. Norrell, the two are tied for my favourite book ever. Like, I loved this so much. Very good, especially for this time of year. It's not too horrifying, is why I'm putting it in the gothic element of it all. Okay, we have two more books. One is a Dracula retelling, which is A Diary of Blood by S.T. Gibson. This one I did enjoy. It's done in epistolary format, which I appreciated, written to us as if we are Dracula, and this is written by one of Dracula's brides, talking about how they became Dracula's bride, the different things that went on, this very toxic relationship that is just filled with gaslighting, but we see how this character kind of pulls through that, how they kind of overcome it and the way they overcome it, and I really liked the writing style of this one. Again, it's kind of that more slightly purpley prose writing with some very difficult topics in here, but it worked really, really well, and a very good one for this time of year. I mean, it was a vampire book, of course it's going to work, but yeah, I did like this one. I just thought it was so interesting. This is a book I picked up because of Jan. It's one of Jan's favourite books ever. It was very good, very emotive. The themes that it was exploring in this was brilliant. I did very much enjoy that. Okay, and lastly we have another vampire-esque book, and that is House of Hunger by Alexis Henderson, another book I annotated. And this one again is more leaning into the gothic rather than the horror fully. This world where you can become a blood bride. The way it works is we have the elite of society that drinks people's blood to stay young and in health and all of this stuff. It's weird rich people weirdness, okay? But we're following a main character who decides to become this blood bride. Is it blood bride or blood mage? Blood maid. There we go. And when she gets to this particular house, she becomes enamored by the lady of the house, the person that she's meant to give her blood to. And it is, again, a very dark tale. I think vampires are used very well to explore very toxic, troubling relationships. That's what this book really does explore. And we have this very eerie, sinister house. We have the different weird things that are going on that are slightly unexplained, that don't really make sense, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a great time. Loved the concept of this one as well. It was great. It was like a whole new take on the idea of vampires. Moving slightly into young adult now, we've got Small Favours by Erin A. Craig. Erin A. Craig does quite eerie gothic books anyway. They actually have a new book out. I think it's the 13th Problem that I would like to read. This I did enjoy though. This one is very much a summer horror. It's got elements of folklore tied into this book. So we are following Ellery. Ellery is living in this very isolated place called Amity, and then weird stuff starts happening. But it all starts off where people are going off on this trip to get supplies for this little town, but then people go missing, and there's this new person in town, and lots of people are blaming him for what is happening. There are some really weird, fearsome creatures out in those woods that surrounds Amity. Very terrible things start happening. Tempers start rising. You kind of see how a mob mentality can catch fire within such a secluded place, and the devastating consequences of it. I really enjoyed it. I really liked the build up to this. I liked the incorporation of it feeling very much like a folklore tale. I can't remember if it is based on folklore, but that's what the vibe it gave off, which I really enjoyed. And this does span a few different seasons, so it does still work for reading it in autumn to winter time. It was just very, I'm gonna say it again, unsettling. I like the atmosphere, the dread that was being built up, and the twists and turns that this book took. Some were a bit predictable, others I was a bit like, that was good. I enjoyed that. But I really liked just that depiction, as I said, of that mob mentality, the way a very secluded place can become very twisted and toxic because they're so cut off from everything else, and how when you're on the inside you don't notice it, and it takes that outside perspective to go, this is not right, this is wrong, and there's like these weird rules that people have to adhere to, and the way they mete out judgment and justice in this place, it's very backwards, but it was very good to read. A book I mentioned, I think it was on my underrated books video, is Slender Man by Anonymous. This is a book that was honestly quite terrifying to read. It was talking about the phenomenon of Slender Man, how Slender Man came to be, how it was this internet creation that kind of took on a life of its own, and we're following a main character who gets caught up in the world of Slender Man and the different things it's causing. We've had somebody disappear and they believe Slender Man is behind it, and it's so eerie, and I know I keep using that word, but just the way it was done. This was done in mixed media format, which I actually really appreciated. Like, normally I'm not always a fan of mixed media format like this because there's a lot of text, there's interview formats, there's emails, but there are some journal entries, and everything about this book just felt so unsettling is the word for it. It felt like a book that could be real. And I mean, technically it was, because it was an actual thing that happened, that I think it was a university student came up with the idea of Slender Man, and it really did take on a life of its own, and it's a very interesting social comment about online and what it can do, but this just felt so off-putting, which I really enjoyed about it. But it's also, I haven't read this one in a long time, but it's just one that sticks with me, one that I think about every so often. I should probably just reread this one. I wanted to mention it because, again, it's not one I hear many people talking about. I do think it works more for a young adult reader, although there was a very interesting video by Willow about what is young adult, which I really appreciated, but it definitely does read the main characters, they are younger teenage characters. But yeah, it was good. Book about somebody disappearing and her friends looking into it, and then this whole thing about the Slender Man overshadowing everything that's going on, and just the way that this feeling like there is this presence that you can't necessarily see but you know is there. Oh, things like that freak me out, they really do. Continuing with the younger horror, we have House of Hollow by Crystal Sutherland. This is a really weird book that I really enjoyed. Again, kind of based on folklore fairy tale elements. We have these 3 siblings and they disappeared one day until they came back, except they came back slightly different. Very weird and unusual, and these 3 girls, they don't remember what happened to them until one of their sisters go missing, and the other 2 have to look into the past to find out what happened. I really like this one. There are moments of really unsettling descriptions of like flowers and things growing out of humans, which is always gross, but also in a really hypnotic way that I also can't stop reading about. Like, I really liked it. I liked the twist on this book. I thought it was really well done. I can't even say what it is because it gives everything away. I just thought it was so perfectly done, and now that I know the twist, I know that when I reread this book, it's going to lend a whole different element to this book. But what I really enjoyed most about it was those very visceral descriptions of things growing out of humans that shouldn't be growing out of them. I really enjoyed that. I really liked how that was written in this way that, like I said, it was just mesmerizing. I couldn't take my eyes away from it while at the same time being horrified by what I was reading. Very good book. Do recommend this one a lot. I think it was just, yeah, really good, really weird. Something that's a bit more gothic leaning in that more young adult space. We have The Madman's Daughter by Megan Shepherd, and this is a retelling of Dr. Moreau's Island, which is a very, very dark gothic classic book. A gothic classic that genuinely disturbed me while reading it. It was such an uncomfortable read. But this one is kind of a fresh take on that book. We are following the daughter of Dr. Moreau as she sails out to the island and finds out what has been going on. I actually really liked this. I do want to continue on with the series. Very well done, and I think it pays great homage to the classic. So if you have read the classic and you would be interested in a retelling, I would give this one a try. I mean, I generally tend to really like my gothic classic retellings. They're so interesting to see what has been done with a classic book that still inspires authors now. I love that. I love seeing that progress. This is one I actually picked up in a charity shop. I think I was extremely lucky because these are not easy to find. But yeah, I really enjoyed this one. I enjoyed the setting, I enjoyed the characters, and I did like how we still carried that presence that you feel in the original classic in this book. I think Megan Shepherd did a very good job of portraying that. So if you do like a retelling and you haven't read this one, then I'd recommend it. Okay, and then the final young adult horror book I have is All the Dead Lie Down by Kyrie Macaulay. This is a book that I did like. It kind of is a take on that haunted house vibe. So we have our main character whose mum has just passed away. She is now staying with her mum's best friend as a nanny just to help her get through the summer. But things are weird. These children are creepy. Like, really creepy. Two very unsettling children. They do some disturbing things. And again, we have this house that is a bit unsettling. We have their mother who, she's very weird, reclusive, does some strange, unusual things. We have our main character that's kind of caught up in it all and is a bit like, I don't know what's happening here. Things do turn slightly ghostly and paranormal, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was a good time. It's a very easy read. You don't have to focus too heavily on it. So if you want something that is just a quick, fast read, don't need to focus on it too much, but you want the atmosphere, I would say give this one a try. Maybe from like the library or something if you just want something a little bit lighter but still with those slightly horror leaning tendencies. But okay, those are all technically 19 because you got an extra freebie book recommendations for horror/gothic books. Please let me know if you've read any of these, what you think of these, and as I said, what is your favorite horror book? Whether it's a slightly lighter, cozier horror or whether it is the darker side of horror, please just let me know. That is everything for today's video. So thank you so much for watching. If you've made it this far or you just don't know what to comment, then leave something horrifying, I guess. It could be a vampire, it could be a coffin, a skull. I'll leave it up to you. Feel free to put what you want in the comments below, and genuinely thank you so much for taking the time to watch these videos, for interacting, everything. I love it. I love the community we're building on here, so thank you. It is time for me to go, so if you have enjoyed this video, then please do consider giving it that thumbs up, subscribing, commenting. Those 3 things really help this channel out. My social media links and anyone I've mentioned will be linked below for you, and I will of course catch you in the very next video.